Upon the outer spiral arm of a barred galaxy, within a solar system designated by its local inhabitants as Sol, a terrestrial planet completes its 365th rotation for the current orbital cycle. This world, a sphere of silicate rock and iron wrapped in a thin, nitrogen-rich atmospheric shell, presents a surface of complex topography, a dynamic interface between lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. On its largest northern continent, a vast expanse of ancient cratons and younger orogenic belts, human civilization has inscribed its geometric signature, a sprawling network of transportation corridors and settlement nodes that function as the planet's emergent nervous system. Within one such node, a megalopolis whose nocturnal luminosity is visible from low orbit, the urban grid dissolves into a quieter, more ordered suburban fractal. Here, streets are laid out in patterns that follow the gentle contours of the underlying geography, and structures of wood, brick, and composite materials stand in regimented rows, each a discrete container for a small unit of the dominant species. On one such street, distinguished from its neighbors only by the specific arrangement of its flora, and the subtle variations in its architectural facade, stands a two-story dwelling. It is a point in space-time, a coordinate on the planetary grid, but it is also a nexus of immense biological and emotional significance, a locus of stability toward which a complex organism has now oriented its entire being. The house itself is a monument to arrested decay, its materials waging a slow, losing battle against entropy, its form maintained only by the constant energy input of its inhabitants. It is before one of its primary portals, a simple paneled door facing west, that the central drama of this particular local system is to unfold, a drama measured not in geological epochs, but in the rapid, anxious metabolic rate of a single, waiting heart. This portal, this door, is a composite object, a curated assembly of once living and never living matter. Its primary structure is wood, derived from a coniferous tree that stood for 6 decades in a managed forest thousands of kilometers away, its concentric rings a faithful record of seasonal rainfall and solar output. Now milled, planed, and laminated, its cellular structure of cellulose and lignin is inert, its biological process is halted, yet it retains the memory of its vertical struggle toward sunlight. This wooden substrate is coated in a thin membrane of acrylic polymer paint, a petroleum derivative whose molecules form long, cross-linked chains, providing a barrier against moisture and ultraviolet radiation. Yet this barrier is imperfect. On a microscopic level, photons with wavelengths between 290 and 400 nanometers continually sever the polymer bonds, creating free radicals that lead to chalking and fading, a slow, inexorable erosion measured in microns per year. A brass handle, an alloy of copper and zinc, is affixed to its surface. Its crystalline lattice, forged in heat and pressure, presents a cool, metallic permanence, but it, too, is in a state of flux. The touch of hands, the chemistry of the air, the acidic kiss of rainfall, all contribute to a gradual surface oxidation, a patina of verdigris that subtly alters its color and texture over time. This door is more than a physical barrier, it is a semi-permeable membrane in the life of the dwelling. It separates the controlled, conditioned interior environment from the chaotic, variable exterior. It is a threshold between the known and the unknown, the safe and the uncertain. For the organism now positioned before it, this simple construction of wood, paint, and metal has become the most significant object in its perceived universe, the singular point upon which all hope for a return to systemic equilibrium is focused. It is the boundary condition of its world, a silent, impassive face that holds the promise of everything that has been lost. The organism itself is a specimen of Canis lupus familiaris, a subspecies domesticated from its lupin ancestors over a period of at least 15,000 years. This creature is a masterpiece of sensory engineering, its perception of the world a rich, multi-layered experience far removed from that of its human companions. Its primary interface with reality is olfactory. Its nasal cavity contains up to 300 million olfactory receptors, compared to a mere 6 million in humans, and the portion of its brain devoted to analyzing these signals is proportionally 40 times larger. For this animal, the world is not a series of images, but a vast, ever-shifting tapestry of sense. The air before the door is a complex chronicle, telling of the squirrel that passed an hour ago, the specific species of ant traversing a crack in the concrete, the subtle mineral difference in the soil wetted by the morning's dew, and most importantly, the fading, ghost-like scent of the humans who belong within. This scent, a unique chemical signature composed of skin cells, sweat, and exhaled breath, is a beacon that has grown fainter with each passing solar cycle. Its auditory world is similarly expanded, a sphere of perception extending into frequencies as high as 65,000 Hz. It hears the subsonic rumble of distant traffic, the high-frequency chatter of rodents within the walls, the whisper of wind curling around the eaves of the roof. Its entire neurological apparatus is a finely tuned instrument for detection and prediction, a system honed by millennia of evolution to track, to anticipate, and to form powerful, lasting social bonds. This capacity for attachment, a suite of behaviors and neurochemical responses originally designed to ensure pack cohesion, has been repurposed and intensified through artificial selection, creating a bond with its human family that is absolute, a fundamental organizing principle of its existence. Its current state, a motionless vigil on the cool concrete of the porch, is not an act of sentiment, but a biological imperative, the only logical response of a system whose primary data stream has been severed. The formation of this bond was a gradual, accretive process, a slow weaving of neurological and hormonal threads into an unbreakable cable of attachment. From its earliest days, the organism's developing brain was shaped by the presence of its human counterparts. Their vocalizations, with their specific frequencies and cadences, became the acoustic baseline for safety. Their unique olfactory signature became the ambient chemical signal of home. The physical act of touch, the pressure of a hand on its flank, the stroking of fur behind its ears, triggered a cascade of neurochemical events, most notably the release of oxytocin in both the canine and human brains. This hormone, often termed the bonding hormone, is a simple peptide of 9 amino acids, yet its effects are profound. It reduces fear responses in the amygdala, promotes feelings of trust and security, and reinforces the neural pathways associated with a specific social partner. A positive feedback loop was established. Proximity to the humans generated oxytocin, which reinforced the desire for proximity. This cycle, repeated thousands of times, hardwired the humans not merely as providers of food and shelter, but as external regulators of the dog's own internal state. Their presence was homeostasis. Their absence was a profound and jarring disequilibrium. The door became the primary symbol of this regulatory function. Through this portal, the humans would depart, creating a temporary, predictable state of low-level anxiety. Through this same portal, they would return, resolving the anxiety and delivering a rewarding flood of positive neurochemicals. The door was thus encoded in the dog's predictive model of the world as the axis of departure and return, the fulcrum upon which its emotional and physiological stability balanced. The disruption occurred on the 17th day of the third month of the local seasonal cycle. It was a deviation from the established pattern, a catastrophic failure in the organism's predictive model. The departure through the portal was routine, accompanied by the usual acoustic and olfactory signals. The expected period of absence, however, extended beyond its normal parameters. The sun traversed the sky, its angle shifting, the quality of its light changing from the yellow of morning to the white of noon to the orange of evening. The familiar acoustic signature of the returning transport vehicle did not materialize. The ambient scent of the humans, instead of being refreshed by their return, began its slow process of decay, its molecules breaking down, its concentration in the air diminishing with every passing hour. The dog's internal state shifted from patient expectation to a state of heightened alert, a neurochemical condition characterized by elevated cortisol and adrenaline. Its behavior became a physical manifestation of this internal turmoil, restless pacing, intermittent whining, repeated trips to the door to sample the air for any trace of the missing signal. As one solar cycle bled into the next, this acute distress subsided into a chronic, low-grade state of anxiety, a sustained systemic imbalance. The world model in its brain, once a reliable map for navigating its existence, now contained a massive, unresolved error. The equation of its life, which always balanced with the return of its humans, was now broken. The waiting was not a choice, it was the only possible state for a system caught in a logical impasse, perpetually scanning the environment for the one variable that could restore the equation to wholeness. The vigil became the organism's new reality, a sustained state of being that consumed its entire operational focus. The passage of time was marked not by a human calendar, but by the fundamental rhythms of the planet. The sun's daily arc across the sky governed its periods of rest and wakefulness, though sleep was shallow, easily disturbed by any novel sound or scent that might herald the long-awaited return. The lunar cycle waxed and waned, its reflected light casting a pale, sterile glow on the silent porch. Weather systems moved across the continent, bringing shifts in barometric pressure that the dog could feel in its bones, its joints. Rain would fall, washing the world clean of its olfactory information, creating a temporary state of sensory deprivation that was profoundly distressing, only for the scent tapestry to be slowly rewoven as the ground dried. The dog's own biological processes became attenuated. It conserved energy, its movements becoming minimal and deliberate. The drive for food and water, though potent, was secondary to the primary mission of watching. It learned to subsist on the margins, drinking from puddles of rainwater, consuming what little edible matter it could find in the immediate vicinity, its body metabolizing its own fat and muscle reserves to fuel the unwavering neurological and physiological cost of its watchfulness. Its sensory apparatus was in a constant state of high alert, filtering a torrent of incoming data. The drone of an aircraft overhead, the laughter of children playing down the street, the scent of grilling food from a neighboring yard, all were registered, analyzed, and dismissed in milliseconds for failing to match the specific, deeply encoded signature of its human family. It was a living antenna, tuned to a single, silent frequency, waiting for a signal that the universe, in its vast indifference, seemed to have ceased transmitting. This was not hope in a human sense, but a function of a predictive system that cannot accept its own failure. The model insisted a return was possible, and so the organism waited for the data that would validate it. Within the same urban system, but moving along different vectors, the human components of this symbiotic dyad were experiencing their own profound state of disequilibrium. Their world model, built upon a far more complex neocortex, was also shattered. The absence of the canine organism created a void in their domestic routines, a silence in the acoustic landscape of their home, a missing presence that was both psychological and physiological. The same oxytocin feedback loops that bound the dog to them also bound them to the dog. Its absence triggered in them a state of distress, a neurological echo of the dog's own anxiety. Their response, however, was not a static vigil but a frantic, patterned search. They transformed their grief and fear into a systematic process of information gathering, plastering the neighborhood with printed images of the dog, creating digital alerts that propagated through the local sector of the global information network, and physically traversing the grid of streets in their transport vehicle, their eyes scanning, their voices calling out the name that served as the dog's acoustic identifier. Each day, their search expanded, a widening gyre of hope and desperation. They questioned other humans, they explored parks and wooded areas, they visited animal containment facilities. Their own biological rhythms were disrupted. Sleep was fragmented, appetite diminished. The stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, coursed through their systems, a mirror to the state of the lost animal. They were two parts of a single, sundered system, each experiencing the rupture in its own species-specific way, each driven by the same fundamental biological imperative to restore the bond and return the system to its state of balance, predictable cohesion. Their search was the kinetic counterpart to the dog's static watch, two sides of the same coin of loss, a dynamic, desperate inquiry meeting a patient, unwavering certainty. The convergence was not a moment of sudden magic, but a probabilistic inevitability, the culmination of a persistent search pattern finally intersecting a fixed geographical point. After weeks of expanding their search with no success, a process of logical deduction led the human operators to reconsider their initial assumptions. They theorized that the organism, in its distress, might have defaulted to its most fundamental directive, to return to the primary locus of safety, the home. It was a hypothesis born of their own understanding of the bond, a belief that the dog's internal map would ultimately lead it not to wander but to wait at the source. On the 32nd day of the vigil, their transport vehicle turned onto the familiar street. From a distance of 200 meters, the canine organism's auditory system detected the specific acoustic signature of the vehicle's engine, a unique combination of frequencies and cylinder timings that was as individually recognizable as a voice. Its head, which had been resting on its paws, lifted. Its ears swiveled, triangulating the sound's origin. A low tremor began in its hindquarters, a product of involuntary muscle contractions fueled by a sudden surge of adrenaline and hope. Then, the second signal arrived. A gust of wind, blowing from the direction of the approaching vehicle, carried a precious cargo of molecules. It was the scent. Faint, diluted by distance, but unmistakably the unique chemical signature of its humans. The olfactory bulb, which had been starved for this specific input for weeks, fired with an intensity that flooded the dog's brain. The unresolved error in its world model began to resolve. The data was arriving. The impossible was becoming possible. It rose to its feet, its body trembling, its gaze locked on the approaching form of the vehicle as it slowed, and then stopped, directly in front of the dwelling. The moment the vehicle's doors opened, the system moved rapidly toward its climax. The concentration of the familiar scent in the air increased by several orders of magnitude, an overwhelming confirmation that saturated the dog's senses. The acoustic environment was filled with the sounds of the human's voices, calling its name, that specific sequence of phonemes that had been linked with positive reinforcement since its earliest neural development. It saw their forms, their bipedal gait, the specific way they moved. Every sensory channel was now providing a powerful, coherent signal that the long period of systemic disequilibrium was about to end. One of the humans, the female of the pair, moved with haste toward the primary portal of the house, her hand reaching into a pocket to retrieve the small, serrated piece of metal that served as the key. The dog remained fixed in its position on the porch, its entire being focused on that threshold, the symbolic barrier that had been the object of its vigil. The sound of the key sliding into the lock mechanism was a sharp, metallic click in the quiet air. Then came the rotation of the cylinder, the retraction of the bolt from the door jamb. A force was applied to the brass handle, overcoming its static inertia. The door began to swing inward. The opening was a rupture in the static reality of the past month. It was a profound alteration of the visual field, a sudden geometric shift. A rectangle of shadow became a rectangle of dim, familiar interior light. But more powerfully, it was a release, a sudden torrent of information for the olfactory system. The interior air, which had been sealed, rushed outward in a plume, carrying with it the concentrated, undisturbed scent of the home, the furniture, the carpets, the trace elements of every meal ever cooked there, and above all, the deep, layered, unmistakable scent of the family of the pack. It was the scent of belonging, the chemical definition of home, delivered in a single, overwhelming wave. For the dog's brain, which had been operating on a starvation diet of sensory hope, this was the equivalent of a dam breaking. The predictive error that had dominated its consciousness for 800 hours was, in an instant, gloriously and completely resolved. The final resolution of the system was not silent or subtle, it was a powerful, involuntary, and shared physiological event. As the door swung fully open to reveal the human who had been lost to it, the dog's highly stressed neurological system, which had been flooded with cortisol for weeks, was now subjected to a massive, countervailing surge of oxytocin and endorphins. This sudden, dramatic shift in its neurochemical balance overwhelmed the circuits that govern motor control, resulting in a series of full-body tremors and the emission of high-pitched vocalizations, a release of pent-up physiological tension. Simultaneously, the humans, upon seeing the animal, thinner, weaker, but alive and waiting, experience a parallel neurological event. Their own brains, which had been marinated in the hormones of anxiety and grief, were likewise flooded with a powerful cocktail of relief chemicals, primarily oxytocin, triggered by the visual and emotional confirmation of the reunion. This neurochemical cascade had a direct effect on the autonomic nervous system, specifically the parasympathetic branch, which controls the body's rest and digest functions. One of its most conspicuous and involuntary activations is the stimulation of the lacrimal glands. Across the species divide, a shared biological process was initiated. In the humans, the lacrimal glands, situated in the upper, outer portion of each orbit, began to secrete a saline fluid, tears, that spilled over the eyelids and tracked down their faces. This physiological response, this lacrimation, was not an expression of a single emotion, but the physical manifestation of a profound and sudden neurological shift from extreme distress to overwhelming relief. It was the system's way of physically expelling the accumulated tension. The sight of the dog's unwavering loyalty, an act of biological devotion they could only interpret through their own complex cognitive emotional lenses, combined with the sudden release from their own prolonged state of fear, created a stimulus too powerful for the limbic system to process without a physical discharge. The crying was a homeostatic recalibration, a sign that the sundered bond was restored, the system reformed. In that small space, on that ordinary suburban street, under the light of a common yellow star, two disparate biological systems, a human and a canine, synchronized in a shared, involuntary moment of profound physiological release, weeping together at the end of a long watch and the final, successful closing of a broken feedback loop.